New York City is known for being ground zero in a clash of civilizations, but it's increasingly turning into ground zero for a new American civil war, a war between federal power and far-left secessionist municipalities. On December 7th, the very same day as the anniversary of Pearl Harbor, a very different attack on our nation came from a 33-year-old socialist mayor-elect who looked directly into the camera and told 3 million illegal migrants exactly how to evade federal law enforcement. But if Mamdani thought he could get away with that little stunt, he was in for a very rude awakening. Within hours, the Trump administration responded. And what they did next is sending shockwaves to far-left mayors across the country. Hey gang, it's me, Dr. Steve, your Patriot Professor, here to help you make sense of all the madness as the far left desperately tries to stop the unstoppable rise of a new conservative age that you're making happen all over the world. So if you want a front row seat on how you continue to change the world in ways you never even imagined, make sure to smack that bell and subscribe button. As many of you know, the ultra-leftist mayor-elect Zoran Mamdani pledged during his campaign to, quote, Trump-proof New York by turning it into the mecca of sanctuary cities. And he made good on that pledge this week by posting a video and instructed illegal migrants on how to evade federal law enforcement. What's so interesting here is that while Mamdani hasn't even assumed office yet, he's already fired a major shot escalating what's amounting to a kind of civil war within our nation. Victor Davis Hanson's been calling sanctuary cities the Blue Confederacy, in that blue cities in Democrat-led states are basically engaging in neo-Confederate secessionist ideology by openly defying federal immigration enforcement. So mayors in cities like Portland and LA and Chicago are claiming that they can basically nullify federal law within their own jurisdictions, just as South Carolina, for example, claimed during the Civil War that the union's laws don't apply to them. Well, elected officials like California Governor Gavin Newsom, and LA Mayor Karen Bass, Chicago Governor J.B. Pritzker, they're all actively encouraging resistance to ICE operations, sometimes with violence from Antifa groups that serve as disestablished resistance that these blue state governors and mayors depend on to try to destabilize and delegitimize President Trump's law enforcement obligations and efforts. And this video from Mamdani is yet the latest act of hostility among these neo-secessionists. Now, the problem, of course, for all these blue Confederates is that all Americans, regardless of where they live, are first and foremost citizens of the United States and subject to federal laws. It's part and parcel of what's known as the Supremacy Clause, where federal law always trumps state and local law. And so it's unavoidable that what these far-left officials are doing by encouraging resistance to federal law enforcement really is no different from what caused the Civil War of the past. And if that's the case, if these blue state mayors and governors are in the position of the Southern secessionists, well, then that would mean that President Trump is in the position of Abraham Lincoln, who was committed to stamping out and crushing this anti-federal resistance. Within literally hours of the Mamdani video, the Trump administration responded not with negotiation, not with compliance or dismissal, but with a clear message. We're coming into New York City harder than you could have ever imagined in your worst nightmares. Border Czar Tom Homan didn't threaten, he promised.
But New York City, I plan on being in New York City in the near future. We're going to do operations in New York City. We know in New York City, me and Mayor Adams at one point had an agreement to let ICE into Rikers Island so we can arrest the public safety threats and the safety and security of that facility, but the city council shut it down. So we're going to be coming to New York City. We're already there now. I mean, teams are there now. But we will increase the enforcement presence in New York City, again, because they're a sanctuary city, and we know we have an issue there with public safety threats hitting the street every day.
And in that line, federal officials have officially launched a first-of-its-kind Homeland Security Task Force in New York City, designed to target transnational criminal organizations and bolster public safety. The task force is co-led by Homeland Security Investigations and the FBI, with significant collaboration and coordination from the U.S. attorney's offices in both the southern and eastern districts of New York. Nearly every major federal, state, and local law enforcement agency in the state is participating. Now, while technically distinct from ICE, from immigration enforcement, the task force brings together agencies that frequently intersect with ICE operations, particularly in drug trafficking and organized crime investigations. And so, again, in that vein, ICE's Homeland Security Investigations Division will co-lead this effort. In other words, Trump is bringing the full force of the federal government to crush any and all efforts that a Mamdani administration would employ to thwart federal law enforcement. And we're already seeing the effects. ICE has launched a massive operation in New York City, with multiple federal agencies coordinating 29 teams across the region. They've arrested nearly 4 dozen illegals in a single day, far exceeding ICE's average daily arrests. Now, of course, the legacy media, they're absolutely flipping out over all of this, but that's only because the legacy media doesn't report news. They report narratives, right? What's sold as neutral reporting is too often activism in disguise, crafted to guide perception rather than reveal truth. And as a result, millions are waking up to the realization that the news is broken. But it doesn't have to stay that way. And luckily, there's a wonderful solution. Ground News brings together headlines from over 50,000 news sources and makes it easy to understand what's happening. But what really makes it powerful is the transparency. You don't just see the stories. You see the political bias behind every source, the ownership ties, and the coverage breakdown across the spectrum. That's why over 1 million people have downloaded Ground News. Check it out for yourself at ground.news/Steve. My favorite feature is the blind spot feed. It shows you which stories are blowing up on one side of the political aisle, but barely mentioned on the other. It's the clearest way to see media bias in action. So, for example, here's a story the left is completely ignoring. It's a story on J.D. Vance backing President Trump's call to arrest the seditious six, right? The several Democratic lawmakers who released a video urging military and intelligence officials to disrupt the chain of command. Every single Democrat involved admitted that Trump has never given an unlawful order. And so the legacy media is completely ignoring it. Now, of course, right-wing media ignores its stories too, but now you'll know. With every story, Ground News shows you the entire spectrum of who's reporting from left, right, and center, how reliable each source is, and who owns each outlet. It's everything the corporate media doesn't want you to see. And right now you can get 40% off the Vantage plan, which gives you unlimited access to all the features I personally use for just $5 a month. Visit ground.news/Steve, click the link in the description, or scan the QR code. That's ground.news/Steve. The new civil war that so many are concerned about goes way beyond the urban-rural divide. One of the models for what a potential civil war in the United States would look like comes from the nation of Colombia and their own civil war that ravaged their nation from 1948 to 1958. And that was a civil war fought between rural populations versus urban populations. So it was a rural-urban divide. And a few years back, that looked eerily similar to what we were seeing breaking out with the BLM activists, riots, burning down cities across the country and harassing suburban neighborhoods, with armed militias responding by kicking BLM agitators out of particularly rural areas. So this was something similar to what we saw in over a decade of fighting in Colombia, where rural militias and urban riots more or less fought for control over their suburbs as a buffer zone. But what we've been seeing of late with Mamdani and the rise of Ilhan Omar and the revelation of Somali corruption scandals and the like, it gives us further insight into the nature of this potential civil war. Here's Elon Musk in a recent interview and how he's assessing this rising and very serious situation.
Well, let's look at, Ilhan Omar, who was voted into Congress by a large group of people from Somalia who are in Minnesota, which is really far from Somalia, or Mamdani, who was voted to be mayor, but by a majority of people who are not born in America. That's my understanding, at least. And then California is a big time situation. So I don't know. We just don't want to turn into a communist hellhole, basically.
Now, Elon is spot on there. This urban versus rural divide is actually turning more and more into an American versus post-American divide, or an American versus anti-American divide. In other words, what we're increasingly seeing is that our cities are becoming overrun by populations who were not born here. And increasingly, as President Trump has been pointing out, they're populations that aren't even from nations from within Western civilization. They're from third world nations that share very little in common with the historical and cultural dynamics that led to the formation of our nation. And so what we're finding is that this growing third world demographic embedded in our nation's cities are voting for leaders who are actively advocating for the dismantling of the basic structures of our nation. So, for example, federal governance, or a merit-based society, or the rule of law, or free markets, or entrepreneurialism, or even the Electoral College. And they believe that they have the right, by virtue of their norms, by virtue of their own cultural identities, they have the right to tell our federal government to shove it. They're openly saying we are not citizens of the United States. We are citizens of a post-American nation that has yet to emerge, but we're the ones who are going to make sure that it does. That's why Trump is deporting so many people from blue states and blue cities. Right? A lot of people have been wondering, why is he spending so much time in LA and in Chicago and New York City? Here you go. This is why. It's because of this emerging America versus post-America civil war. Trump is actively attempting to completely disrupt and reverse, through reverse migration, demigration, this trend of third world immigration and its blatantly anti-American politics that's starting to institute with a vengeance. In other words, Trump is putting an end to the clash of civilizations that has ignited within our own nation. And if he does that, he will most certainly go down in history, not just as another George Washington, but as another Abraham Lincoln as well. If today's message resonated with you, you'll love Turley Walks, my free preview of the Courageous Patriot Club. More stories, more perspective, more community focused on faith, family, and freedom. And it's absolutely free. Go to turley.pub/turleywalks.